All right, so for my book review, I reviewed a book by Damien Echols called High Magic. Just a real quick thing about Damien Echols. Damien Echols is the man who was considered the ringleader for the West Memphis Three. 3 8-year-old boys were killed, and a mentally handicapped boy named Jesse gave a recount of how he was around, and Damien was the ringleader of all of this. And basically, in trial, they focused on Damien's obsession with magic as a kid, who he listened to for music, and this account of this kid who's not mentally all there. So I guess for starters, if it's your music you listen to, which he was talking about listening to Metallica, I must be the number one suspect in a bunch of murders. While I hate Metallica, I listen to a lot heavier bands like Lamb of God and Cannibal Corpse and, Meshuggah, a bunch of other bands like that. So I guess I must be number one on the murder suspect list. So, without further ado, I'm going to get into the High Magic book. Damien Echols and I actually got into it on Facebook one time when I had no idea who Damien Echols was. My aunt was commenting on a post about Damien Echols getting out of prison, and me just being a troll, I said, well, maybe you shouldn't hang out with terrible people and you wouldn't find yourself in prison. Had no idea who Damien Echols was, never even heard of him. And Damien Echols was sentenced to 18 years when I was, like 4 years old. So I'd never heard of him. I think he was sentenced in 94, somewhere in that area. So I was talking crap to him. He commented back and was not very nice to me. So if I ever get a chance to meet him, hopefully he remembers me so I can apologize to him. But anyways, Damien Echols sent to prison. His book, High Magic, is a focus on being positive. And I feel like maybe I should read this book more. Because I'm one of the most negative people I've ever been around. I'm a very negative person with everything. And reading to his book, I think made me understand that I'm kind of a negative asshole. Pardon my language, but I don't know how else to put it. And so I don't know how else to put that. But reading his book has made me realize that maybe I should be a little more positive. I'm trying to find the direct quote that I wanted to use that was most important to me. But for some reason, as I'm going through the book again, and I don't have a PDF version of it, so I can't type it in. So I'm going to choose two different ones. But the direct quote I wanted to use was early in the book. He's talking about his wife and him having a saying while he's in prison. And while he's in prison, the last year he's on death row. Mind you, he's sentenced to death over this because he's a ringleader. His wife and him were speaking about getting out of prison. They weren't saying anything like help law enforcement or help the DAs find the person who did commit this terrible crime. They're being positive, and they're saying, please let Damien return home. Please let him return home in good health, and please let him return home to his wife. And every single day, his wife and him would say those same exact things. And because I haven't read his other book, Life After Death, I'm not exactly sure how he and his wife met, but because he was 18 years old when he was sentenced to die, so I'm not sure about that. But that's pretty important that they weren't saying, get me home, or find the person who did this. They were just saying, get me home and get me home in good health. Damien Echols was released because of DNA evidence that showed that he wasn't the killer. And so that's why he was released when he was released. Damien also talks about how the last week he was on death row, he got so sick because he was concerned that something may happen to where he's going to end up dying on death row anyways, that he got flu-like symptoms. He had blisters inside of his mouth and on his tongue, and he was just having a rough go of it. And I could see why. Now, knowing what I know, I could totally see why that would be something. The other thing is that Damien Echols directly relates magic to why he's where he's at. This book is about how he survived his 18 years on death row, and 18 years is a long time. Another guy in Colorado that everybody's probably familiar with who's spent a lot of time in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and that's Timothy Masters, although I don't think Timothy Masters has written a book. But I specifically chose Damien Echols because I talked crap to him on Facebook one time, and I wanted to at least learn about him a little bit. So So that's what he talks about and how he relates magic. And he also spells magic with a K and not a C. He states that magic with a K is different than magic with a C, because magic with a C is the David Copperfields and the Chris Angels of the world, and his is more of a spiritual understanding of life. He talks about how Jupiter, if you relay the energy from Jupiter, it's positive energy, but if you want to put it on negative energy on somebody, you would harness the energy of Saturn. And that ultimately the way that you use magic is a lot like using a hammer. Hammer's design purpose is not to kill somebody, it's actually to build things like a house. But it can be used to kill somebody. But the person who's wielding the hammer is in ultimate control of how that hammer and tool is used. No different than a wrench. A wrench is designed to tighten and loosen bolts, but in the hands of the wrong person, it can be used to kill somebody. He relays that information to the reader, that the tools that you have, such as magic, are there for you to use how you choose to do it. Hopefully it's with positivity and not negativity. As he goes through his time in prison, he really has to focus on how he can be positive inside of prison. Prison is real easy for people to get negative inside of. I'm gonna die here. I didn't do it. Why am I here? What's wrong with me? Why did God do this to me? I don't personally believe in God. He makes mention of God numerous times inside of the book, and talks about how how God can really get under people's skin to make them wonder why they're in the position they're in. And so he makes mention of it numerous times. I don't personally believe in it, but that's what he says. He also makes mention of not allowing negative thoughts to overwhelm you, even when you're in dire need of help. For Damien, he spent over half of his time in solitary confinement. It would be real easy to figure out or understand why, after 9 of 18 years in solitary confinement, all by yourself, alone with your thoughts for 24 hours a day, why somebody would be going crazy or why they would want to kill themselves or anything. But Damien said during his time, he never allowed himself to get negative. He always just thought, one day I'm going to get out of prison. The reason I chose this book, like I said, is because of my interaction with Damien Echols on Facebook when I had no idea who he was. But the other reason I chose it is because I didn't want to hear about his whole story in prison and then relay it across. I feel like that was too much to put across. 432 pages is a lot to put across. 200 is a little bit more doable in 10 minutes. And so I chose this one, and I didn't even realize, I didn't read the back of it, I didn't do anything. I didn't realize it was a positivity book. And so hopefully his book helps me be a little more positive. I know I'm being very negative right now about some stuff that's going on at my work. Which is why some of my stuff has been delayed or not been as good. I have a lot going on there. And I'm not even there anymore at the moment. I'm on leave, so I can understand his situation when he was somewhere. So that's why I chose this book. The way I think this directly relates to our class in 3 different sources that we have is, 1, we talk about cruel and unusual punishment, right? I think there's a time and a place for solitary confinement. I don't think 9 out of 18 years is a place for solitary confinement. So we spoke about that in this class numerous times. Number 2, we talked about the death penalty. I just made a video about the death penalty. Damien Echols was sentenced to death. Do I think Damien Echols should have been sentenced to death if he killed somebody? Absolutely. Do I care the means they did it if he killed 3 8-year-old boys? Absolutely not. But do I believe that DNA righted a wrong? Yes. Does that give him back his 18 years in prison? No, it does not. It's unfortunate for Damien Echols that he had to spend that much time in prison. The upside on it, being positive, like his book, a positive thing came from a negative. Damien Echols is now using his platform to advocate for other people. He's got a lot of money in it, and he has the rest of his life now. Luckily, he was only there till he was 38-ish years old. He's got the rest of his life to make the world a better place the way that he sees it. Number 3, the thing that we've talked about is we've talked about our prison system, and do we sentence people? Do we over-sentence people? And I know I'm running out of time. I'm going to go a little bit over 10 minutes. I apologize. But do we overuse our prison system, and do we need to start looking for different ways to help people? Damien Eccles is a prime example of what happens when you are poor. Damien Eccles was a poor kid. He had nothing except for the clothes on his back. He wasn't a very educated man. His parents didn't care about what was going on. I feel the same way. When I was growing up, I had no idea where my parents were. My parents didn't graduate high school. They bolted. They did drugs. He doesn't make mention of if his parents did drugs, but his parents were basically living day to day to try to get past. He dropped out of school. He got himself in a wrong spot. Even though he didn't do anything, he got himself in a wrong spot because he wasn't able to be successful from his parents. It's what our prison system does. Our prison system feeds on the uneducated and the poor. There's a time and a place for the uneducated and the poor that commit crimes to be in prison. However, rather than spending money on other stuff, as I've said in our papers and stuff in here, rather than spending money sending $9 billion to Ukraine, what we need to do is we need to start refunneling that back into our poor areas so that people like Damien Eccles and others don't end up in the position they're in. I'm very grateful that I found this book, and I'm very grateful that I listened to the words that Damien Eccles had to say. I say listened, I read them. But I'm very thankful that I read the words that he had and took them to heart, because I know personally what I'm going to try to do from now on is I'm going to try to look for a positive out of a negative. Rather than saying, God, I really hope I don't get sick. I can't get sick right now. I'm going to just start trying to say, or my kid, I should say, I don't get sick very often. My kid, I'm happy that my son is healthy. My son might be fighting a cold right now, but I'm happy that he's healthy. As long as he's healthy, that's all that matters. That's what I took from this book. I hope that somebody else can take from this book some of the stuff that I've taken from this book. I think it's a very well-written book. I think that in the future, I'm going to read his other 2 books, Life After Death, and I don't know what the other one is, but I think I want to read them because I did have my interaction with Damien Eccles. And so hopefully you can understand why I chose this book after this video. I don't know, lingering questions wise, like what does that mean for him? I don't think this book left any lingering questions. Like, his book is about how to use spirituality, essentially. Magic. He calls it magic. It's spirituality. How do you use your spirituality? For one person to the next, I don't know. I'm not spiritual. I'm not religious. I think what happens, happens. I think there's a reason for why things happen, but I can't quite comprehend what the reason is, but it happens. As far as anything else that happened inside of his books, any of his books, the man was wrongfully accused in prison. If I were him, I would have taken the money and ran. I wouldn't have spent the rest of my life trying to make things better for other people. I would have taken the money, but he did. He's a better person than I am, clearly, because I'm not the kind of person he is. I wouldn't have. I would have taken my money. I would have bought an island, and I would have isolated myself, so I never had to worry about this stuff again. But unfortunately, I'm that way. Fortunately, I'm the way that I am, and he's the way that he is, and he advocates for people. And we've talked about advocating for people in other classes, and there's plenty of TED Talks about getting people off of the death row. So I appreciate your time in this semester. Thank you for listening to my video. I hope it was insightful into the book. It's really hard to summarize a book in 10 minutes. I think just from you to me while we're talking about right now, I think that this thing should be capped at like 25 minutes, and it shouldn't be used to just recite what happened in the book. It should be what we learned from the book. I don't often do the reviews of courses. Generally, I just don't do them because I don't really feel like they go a whole lot of places. But while you're listening to my video, I guess I can do my review for the class right here. I just think that this should be capped a little bit longer than 10 minutes. I think it would be better. I'm at 14 minutes and I didn't even get a chance to give a sliver of the book other than a couple things from it. So thank you again and have a good rest of your day. And I will upload this through YouTube.